We've been talking all the way through this around that if we're trying to tackle complex problems, then collaboration is a response to that. But equally, as has been talked about in Yoshi's session around when do we partner, knowing actually what are we coming together towards? Are we just calling it partnership or collaboration? Or are we genuinely trying to do something different? So this can be a useful tool to use with your teams as well, to really unpack what is it we are doing when we're talking about collaboration, and is it actually collaboration? So at this end of the spectrum, we're talking about that often the relationship we're in a competitive relationship. So we can be competing and collaborating, we usually are, and we know this well, yeah? We compete for numbers of people who use our services, for resources, for funding, for attention, for profile, partners, whatever it might look like. And that's actually really normal. Yeah, we have a value judgment about competition, but to be able to progress, we actually need to compete. That's the only way that we've progressed in the past. Is in the business sector, they do that really well. In sport, we do it really well. But when it comes to transplanting that into the social sector, we really struggle with this idea of competition. But in a way, it's just a desire to be progressing, as long as we can harness that on behalf of our purpose. So thinking about when are you competing and what is competing, and that there will be many different things competing at different times. It could be that you're coexisting, that the organizations or partners you're working with, you're doing similar work, and you're aware of each other, but there's no systemic connection, and there actually doesn't need to be because of the nature of the work you're doing. Then we move to more we're in a communication relationship. So interagencies, we all sit around the table and we share what we're doing. We network, but again, there's no requirement that we might need to do anything different or that we would change our practice in any way. But we want to keep each other across what we're doing. Then it could be you're in a relationship where there's cooperation required to be able to deliver your goal. And all of this needs to be embedded in what your purpose is. What is it you're trying to achieve, and what type of impact are you having? And therefore, what type of relationship do you need? But often in cooperation, and this may be a partnership, it could be a couple of services coming together as needed, because you believe you can get a better outcome by delivering services together than either of you can alone. But usually this is one-off, it's project-based, and it's fairly discrete. It's not an ongoing relationship that you're in. We then move to coordination, and that's where there's, which is more probably the nature of when we're aligning services. And it requires a number of organizations to systemically align what they're doing and adjust slightly some of the work. And again, this is because there is a desire or a promise to get outcomes that neither one of you can get alone. So this could be co-locating, it could be sharing back office resources, whatever it looks like. But actually all we're doing, again, is coordinating what we currently do with maybe some slight tweaks. We might not be changing practice dramatically. And then collaboration, which is a much longer term interaction. Yeah, you've got a shared mission, outcomes you're trying to get, say in a region or on an initiative, where you've got to start to figure out how do you make decisions together and share the decision making and share resources. That's a much deeper engagement where you've probably there's got to be some adaptation within each organization at the same time. You can't just show up and do what you've always done. We then move further down to fully integrated programs where we've got to do the planning, the funding together. Organizations may merge and join forces because again, equally, they can't get the impact they're trying to have by operating alone. And that could be because the conditions have changed. So at the end of the spectrum is collective impact. And we heard that example from Sharon this morning where this is usually at a population level where we're trying to get population level changes. An increase or decrease of at least 10% in indicators. So 10% more people or 10% less. Reduction in health or unemployment, whatever it might look like. But there's a shared agenda across all sectors, and the focus here is on changing the systems. It's not about specific into one-off programs. It's actually we're trying to change the conditions that have led to that issue occurring in the first place. So it's actually a very different piece of work we're coming together for. It could be that to achieve collective impact, you do a lot of these activities, and you need lots of different relationships along that continuum to do it. You know, so Sharon talked about engagement partnership between the preschool early learning and the education department, that might be one of these. They may have coordinated services to get that. But the sum of all those parts leads to a change in the underlying conditions. And this is, you know, intergenerational, might be over decades. Now, the conditions that allow any of that to happen, and there's not a value judgment on this. It's not that this is bad and this is good at this end. It's really driven by the purpose of the work you're doing and the impact you're trying to have. But one of the key things is at this end of the spectrum, the focus is on turf, on protecting turf, and the boundaries around the organisations are fairly tight. And again, that's probably required given the work that's doing. That if you're a service that can deliver most of this work by yourself, you've got the power, the resources, the know-how to do it, then you should absolutely do it and not collaborate. And I would actually say a lot of time is spent because we're told collaboration is the thing we should be doing. When we've actually got the authority and resources to do it ourselves, then you should just do it, because it's bloody hard to collaborate with people who see it differently. You know, this end of the spectrum, it might be traditional collaboration, but the further we go into looking at complexity, his framing, which is quite nice, is stretch collaboration. And stretch collaboration's really got three core things to it. One is that we all accept that we don't have the answers, that we can't plan our way through. We can't control this in the way that we can maybe control some of the work at this end, that we've got to experiment and try things. And the other condition to it is that we see that conflict as well as connection is important, that we're going to have conflicts, that we're going to try and work with people who we will not agree with. And actually, we don't need to agree. We need to have a shared purpose, a common purpose, and the work is how we work across them, but we may never ever shift their viewpoint on it. And that's quite a shift in how we think about collaboration. We would go, we've all got to agree and we've all got to trust each other. He was part of the negotiations around the Colombian peace process where, you know, they were never going to agree. And there probably still is little trust in that context, but they found a way to come together to get common outcomes for the country by figuring out a way to work together because they had that shared agenda. I mean, it took a long time, but they got there. The third part to it is seeing that you are also part of the problem. So, you know, the work that we did on the last day at the end about being able to see what's my piece of the mess, that when we're collaborating at this end, there will be ways that we are engaging, showing up, which are contributing to the complexity. And part of it is a willingness to be able to see that. And again, it's not a precondition. Actually, a precondition in this space at that end of the spectrum might be we're willing to give it a go. You know, particularly where there's been deeply entrenched reasons why people won't come together and collaborate. So if you want to have a look at it, I'd really encourage you to check it out. He's able to, you know, simplify the complexity quite well. So thinking of this continuum where, you know, this end, turf is being protected. We're interested in whose logo's on it, whose job it is, whose role it is, whose patch it is. And as we get further down here, it's more about that's still important, you know, as in the example that Yoshi brought forward earlier. It's still important that people get all their requirements out of this particular collaboration, but to achieve that shared outcome, they've had to negotiate and develop trust. And again, trust isn't a prerequisite. It's actually by being willing to engage and keep on coming back to the table that we build trust, but we will continue to disappoint each other and we'll continue to let each other down and have very different views. and argue. I think, again, we're often looking for this nirvana where we get to a place where it's all agreement. Actually, agreement is status quo. What we're looking for is the contradictions and the differences at this end of the spectrum. So in thinking about this, the reason that I'm banging on about if you don't have to collaborate, then don't, is because, we know it's really difficult, and we talk about these trolls coming up. So what we'd see is what we called the 3 trolls of collaboration, which is a wee bit like, I had the picture there of the billy goat scruff, trying to cross the bridge, and the ogre's underneath the bridge. And like any collaboration, it's a bit like that we've got this promise on the other side that if we collaborate, we'll get to, but we've got to cross the bridge, and we've got these trolls underneath. And if you know the story of the billy goat scruff, that what the goats did was they started to negotiate with the trolls. Couldn't get past the trolls, that's where the trolls lived. And they got to know them, and they outsmarted the trolls to get all the goats across the bridge. And that collaboration's a bit like that these elements will always be there. So that's why the value thing around competition will always be there, and actually we can leverage it in a positive way if we can surface it. So it's a bit like the troll. We've got to take it out from under the bridge and shine a light on it and go, where are we competing? Why are we competing? Is that in service of this purpose? And it may well be, or it may just be because that's our default. So being able to really interrogate that to see we're always going to be in unspoken competition. So if we can, as a sector, start to surface that and see, well, where are we competing and how do we leverage that on behalf of what we're trying to do? So where I've seen that done well, and not very often, because it's a really hard thing to talk about, is where there's been, and it was in the homelessness sector, organizations coming together under a consortium. But what they did was they did a bit of an audit around where they were competing, and actually were able to say, you're much better at this than we are. You've got strengths and resources and authority there that we don't have. So you take up a particular role and we'll step back. But again, they had to get to a place of trust that they could do that or be willing to have that type of conversation. So it's not that competition is a problem, it's the fact that we don't surface it or talk about it or acknowledge it. So again, thinking, what would it look like if you were able to be explicit, a bit like in the partnership brokering, about the motivations that are there and the competition and the power. We just start to have different conversations. The other troll is the troll of control, which is that this will show up anywhere we are. Now, depending on how much power you've got, and that's why this layer to it is interesting, that often we think those with more formal authority, positional authority, they used to be in control. So if we're trying to work in a collaborative way, they've got to let go of that. Now, how I've seen that show up is for government organizations to be the ones that take a step back and not be directing, but enabling the work to happen. But equally, it means that, the NGOs or community organizations often can control the process or block the process by withholding knowledge, by not engaging it in the way. That's a huge form of control. And that often comes from a place of feeling that they've got lower power. And again, some work I did in the homelessness sector, it was enabling the government stakeholders and community stakeholders to see that actually they both had huge amounts of power. They were just quite different. But the narrative in the community sector was, you guys hold all the power, you're the funders. And they didn't see the power that they had because they engaged directly with the homelessness population, and government needed them. So when they were able to both get to a place of seeing, actually where we sit, you guys are holding all the cards. They were both projecting the same thing onto each other. So the conversation started to be different when they started to see, actually, we've all got a bit of power and we are controlling the process by stopping it in a range of different ways. So identifying where might that be playing out? Where might we be inadvertently or consciously controlling the outcomes because we feel that we're in a position of lower power, as opposed to tapping into the different power we've got and thinking, how do we use that? And the other troll is the troll of commitment. You know, and this is where it's not the usual that we say we're going to do something and then we don't do it. This is more where we say that we want to go into a partnership or a collaboration, but we don't commit to actually doing the foundational work beforehand. We don't do the work that's required. We don't develop a holding environment. We go into it with the same mindset. And again, that's partly what I heard in what Yoshi was saying around, you know, we slap the collaboration tag on it, but it's business as usual. So understanding if we're going to collaborate, we've got to be committed to working differently. That might be all you get is, okay, we're committed to do it. We might not know how to do it, but we've got a commitment to that. And I want to add another one, which has kind of emerged for me lately in some work I've been doing, and it's another C, which is the critic. I think it's really huge in the collaboration space, particularly where there's very different power levels going on, is that both the inner critic, but also the external critic. That means that we stay in a place of spectating rather than participating, that we're waiting for others to be the ones to step in and drive it and lead it. Because we know that, you know, we're going to get whacked if we step out of our box. That's part of the nature of it because we're trying to actually change systems. But often we're grappling with our own critic about, you know, what's going to happen if I do, and am I authorized to do it? Do I have the power to do it? So I just wanted to add that in.